Welcome. The grand solar minimum gravy train has been derailed, and the culprit is the sun. It has just not been cooperating and producing the sorts of activity that those forecasting a grand solar minimum had anticipated. So let's take a look at what their problem is. Those predicting a grand solar minimum forecasted that the sun would be getting less active. Unfortunately for them, the sun is becoming more active. In fact, December of 2022 is likely to be the first month during solar cycle 25 to have an average sunspot number greater than 100. Equally, global temperatures are not falling as they claim they would be, and affecting crops, for example. They are continuing to increase. You can see from this map here that most of the map shows red, which means a significant increase in global temperatures. Very few areas are blue. The one off the west coast of South America is the La Nina that we're currently in, but that's weakening and is likely to turn to an El Nino by next year. Those predicting a grand solar minimum seem to be changing their tune, and one of the primary culprits in this is ZHARKOVA. In her 2015 paper, the one that made all the fuss about this start, she predicted that solar minimum would be in January of 2018. Well, it turns out that was completely wrong. The actual date was January of 2020. A 2-year error. She also predicted that maximum would be in April of 2022. That was 8 months ago, and we're still not at maximum, and it's unlikely to occur until about 2024 or 2025. So we're a long way away from maximum as yet. She also predicted that maximum for solar cycle 25 would be no more than 100, and we just passed that number this month, and we still have perhaps several years to go before we reach maximum. So that prediction was completely wrong as well. Well, they seem to be changing their tune, as I say. In her 2020 paper, all the timings have changed. All of a sudden and magically, the solar minimum for between solar cycle 24 and 25 comes out to be January of 2020, just like the data shows. But that's not a prediction anymore. That's after the fact. She also predicted that the maximum for solar cycle 25 would occur in 2024. Remember, last time we looked, it was 2.5 years earlier that she had this. She's still predicting that the maximum of solar cycle 25 will be 100, and so that prediction is already wrong. And one other thing to note about this plot, just to make things sufficiently sloppy that she can get away with changing the dates, please note that the time between these dates on her graph change from decade to decade. The funny thing is, those two predictions are completely different, but the model she's using to create those predictions is absolutely identical. So the model hasn't changed at all, but the predictions have changed a lot, which is a bit weird to say the very least. So her model hasn't changed, but her predictions have, which tells me that there's something very fishy going on here. And I'd like to see an explanation from her and her advocates as to why these things have changed when the model has not changed. The sun is unable to explain the crop losses that people have been talking about. There are many billions of dollars of crop losses across the US. Grassland, $3 billion. Wheat, just over $2 billion. Corn, nearly $2 billion. Soybeans, over $1 billion. And there's about $2 billion of other things that are showing losses. But the sun's acting perfectly normally. It can't explain the cold events because the sun is getting more active, not less active. They could be used to explain the heat waves, but these heat waves are so extraordinarily different, like the one in the UK, which beat the all-time high temperature for the UK by 5 degrees and created wildfires that destroyed a large number of homes. There was major flooding like those in Pakistan, where a third of the country was underwater, and there's a phenomenal video of this bridge being just plain washed away. It's not an insubstantial bridge either. We have monster storms like Ian that passed across Florida, causing billions and billions of dollars worth of damage. Well, are global temperatures still increasing? The sun is getting more active, so you would imagine they would, but they are increasing. They continue to increase, but in a steady way, not through an 11-year cycle. So there doesn't seem to be anything associated with the sun in this. It's far more to do with the greenhouse gases in our atmosphere. The long-term trend over the last 50 years is about 0.18 degrees centigrade per decade. However, if you look over the last 100 years, the average is 0.1 degrees centigrade per decade, which means most of the heating has occurred in the last 50 years. A common trick they use to say that the global temperatures aren't fitting the models is to use the wrong data. They often use the satellite-based data, which measures the lower troposphere. That is an altitude of about 4 kilometers on average, and is much cooler than the surface temperatures, which is what they're comparing them to. However, if you look at these data in detail, you can derive a long-term trend from them, and that long-term trend is upwards. It's 0.14 degrees centigrade per decade. Yes, it's less than you get from the surface, which is what you'd expect, but it's still an upward trend. You see there's a lot of variability in this, and there's a lot of variability in the surface temperatures as well. Why is that the case? One major factor here is volcanoes, which can produce sudden cooling of the atmosphere. However, the greatest factor of all is the so-called ENSO cycle, the cycling between El Niños and La Niñas. Currently, we're in a La Niña and have been there for about 3 years. La Niñas are a cooling event in the Pacific Ocean. El Niños are a warming event in the Pacific Ocean. And it is possible to remove the effects of the ENSO cycle, La Niña and El Niño, from the data. There's something that measures the intensity of those events called the Southern Oscillation Index. In November of this year, the SOI was 0.3. So I took the temperature data from every month going back to 1950, where the SOI was between 0.1 and 0.5, i.e. close to the current value of the SOI. Now, as you can see, there's quite a nice curve here. There's not so much noise on the data as before, though there is still some, but you can see that there is a distinct upward trend, and that trend is accelerating. So when you remove the complications of the El Niño and La Niñas, you actually get to see more of the real trend that's going on in the global temperatures. Another trick they use is to use false correlations, and one of the prime examples of that is arguing that earthquakes are caused by solar activity. This is a plot of solar activity, sunspot numbers in yellow, and then the size of earthquakes are shown here in various green, red, and blue. You can see there's very little correlation between them. In fact, the correlation coefficient between these two data sets is 0.2. To be a decent correlation, it should be somewhere like 0.7 or 0.8, and we're nowhere near that. So don't be fooled by the grand solar minimum gravy train that they've been following. They're just trying to pull money from the gullible. It's all a scam. Don't buy their expensive coffee mugs or their silly t-shirts. Don't subscribe to their expensive blogs or websites. And whatever you do, don't send them dollars. If you starve them of their funding, they'll go away and do something else, like alien abductions or Planet X crashing into the Earth any day now. Thank you for listening, and until next time, stay safe and goodbye.